My name is Olga, and today we have an excellent person in our studio. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Leif Lonsmann. I am a journalist. I am not only a journalist, I am even a radio journalist. So podcasts and sound has been my life for more than 40 years, my professional life. I am educated from Danish Broadcasting Corporation, which is the Danish equivalent to the Suspilne, the National Public Service broadcaster. And I spent 10 years as a radio journalist, 10 years as an editor, 10 years as a CEO and manager. And now I'm teaching journalists, and that led me to Leif today to teach a group of students, journalist students, history students, international relations students, to talk about journalism and media and communication.
Okay, and now you're in Ukraine, in Lviv. What is the purpose of your visit?
I work with an organization called Nordic Journalist Center, which is a Nordic organization covering the 5 Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. In all these countries, there are journalists who are educated years ago, and sometimes they need a brush up of their profession. New skills come to, new media come to, and new items for journalism occurs. So we are doing lifelong further education of journalists. And since like the last 15 years or so, we have expanded our activities and joint partnerships with journalists and media organizations in neighboring countries in the neighborhood of the Nordic countries, including the Baltic region, including Belarus, including Ukraine, and even further down to Moldova, Georgia, Armenia. So all our eastern neighbors are becoming our partners, and we do exchange of journalists, study trips to Denmark. We do teaching and exchange and joint projects within journalism between the Nordic countries and the rest of Europe. And that includes Ukraine. And for the last 3 years, we have been running a program on media literacy, which is how to distinguish between clean water and polluted water in the media ocean.
And why do you think this exchange between different countries is extremely important?
Because many problems of today, whether it's climate change or security or immigration or geopolitics, defense, quite many of today's challenges or developments do not restrict themselves to national borders. There ain't such a thing as a Ukrainian climate crisis or a Danish refugee challenge. It's all defense, security. It's all not respecting borders of nations. And if the citizens in the broader region shall be informed in order to participate as active citizens in a living democracy, they need to have the same kind of information, not exactly the same information because they are supposed to create their own opinions, but they need to have like a supply of independent news which goes across borders. So if all citizens in Europe need to understand, say, the depth of climate politics or geopolitics, they all need access to trustworthy information. And that takes journalists and media that can provide the citizens with trustworthy, truth-based journalism. So sharing challenges in a region means sharing the need for information for the citizens, needs shared values and ethics for the media and thus for the journalists across the region. So when the world is united, when Europe is a region and the nation state is kind of too narrow, too small, too bubble to form its own reality and act upon its own reality. So the more global and the more international items are, the more the journalists and the media needs to cooperate. Our journalists in my country, which is a very tiny country, 6 million people only in the entire country, we cannot cover the entire world. We are dependent on cooperation with journalists in other countries to observe, because if we only could provide to the Danish citizens what we hear about Ukraine from outside, we wouldn't get the right picture. That's why we need the input and the inspiration and the methods and the tools and the observations of journalists based inside Ukraine in order to provide our audiences in Denmark with a full-fledged right picture of the event here.
It's a very good approach. For me, it's like a cup of a bubble tea. There are a lot of different bubbles, and we need to split all together to make a good tea.
Gee,
Yeah,
sure.
and it's a very important questions about the interest of Danish society to what really happened in Ukraine. A lot of discussions, like in local level, in international level, that the interest to the war and to the situation in Ukraine is decreased. How can you evaluate the situation? Is it normal, or maybe it is not decreased? Maybe people are still interested and need some facts, some information. If it's so, what kind of information the Danish society need?
You're talking about the decrease or increase of interest in what happens in Ukraine over the last, say, 3 years or 5 or 10. Yeah, there is such a thing as news fatigue, it's called, with a French word, which means that the audiences are tired of news about the same thing all the time. And new conflicts occurs, competing over the awareness of the audiences. So it's a known phenomenon that if a development keeps continuing same way for a long time, it runs out of newsworthiness, of news value. That's very unfair, but unfortunately, that's the way the media business works. If, say, from 2014, when armed conflict started in Ukraine, I may say, in eastern Ukraine, that was news. So we heard a lot about that in 2014, following also the takeover of Crimea. We heard a lot because it was new. The fighting that took place and the internal struggles, the Russian backup of the fighters in the eastern part of Ukraine, that was like a slow war that kept going. The level of violence was almost the same. Same things happened day by day by day by day. Same oppression, same conflicts. And at a certain time, it's not new any longer. And the newspapers have no tradition on like doing like today's repetition of yesterday. So unfortunately and sadly, we are missing the slow conflicts and the repeated and the long time conflicts. Only when something new happens, a game changer come in, a full-scale invasion comes in, there will be news. But if a full-scale invasion will continue and look like itself from the day before, day by day by day, unfortunately and sadly, it will lose interest. That's a phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon we should just like adjust to or adapt to. It's a phenomenon we should be aware of and thus keep our interest and keep the focus, because the tragedy does not disappear just because it's not a new tragedy. So there is a challenge for journalists in and outside Ukraine, I'm sure, to keep the interest, but also to find deeper aspects, other perspectives, everyday life dimensions, instead of this overall who wins, who loses, and how many dies. There is a tendency after a while, even in my country, to look at the war like a football game, and that's extremely unfair to the seriousity, to the danger of war, and to the nature of war. It's like who said what, which president did what, said what, was in the TV, traveled where. It's like a football game. We have a hero and we have a loser, and we have an enemy, we have a friend, we have a victim, we have an offender. That's all true, but it's not the entire picture of everyday's life in Ukraine, because behind those football heroes and enemies, there are ordinary human beings, and that's where the stories are told and the life is lived, and that's what we need to understand. But it's a challenge for journalists to keep interest even when a conflict tends to repeat itself, and to repeatedly find new perspectives, new depths, and new dimensions, and new sources, and new stories to tell, because there are stories enough to tell. War is not just who wins. War is also the life of a lot of people for a long time.
Absolutely. In this case, I just interested in your personal opinion. Is it too selfish for Ukrainian didn't want to be a phenomenon and didn't want to do something extra to be in a top list of the news, because it is about the lives, and my personal attitude that it is a mission of all the international community journalists to talk about unfair situation, about the war, and not think it may be a crazy situation, not think about the money marketing and phenomena. What do you personally mean? Is it possible, or it is like selfish illusion of Ukrainian people who are in this situation day by day?
It's never selfish for a victim to call for attention. Never. It's a phenomenon. It's the case that we are all competing about awareness. Today's currency, the rare currency or the rare mineral in media and information, is awareness. We are in the awareness economy. The awareness of listeners and audiences, viewers and readers like you and me, and the audiences, is about their time. Time is limited, and we will select very carefully with what media will we spend how much time. So the media tends to fight for the attention of people, and that's where new wars or new development or hitherto unknown conflict wins in the newsroom. But I do think that it's never selfish to keep the call for attention as long as important stuff happens. So I hope that the news fatigueness, like we have heard about this, we don't want to listen to, we want something new, that will not kind of cast its shadows into the editors' rooms, that we will be able to, in the newsrooms, to keep our curiosity, and that you would never forget letting us know. So you should keep letting us know. That's not selfish. We should keep our curiosity to listen to what happens and find new dimensions and new sources all the time. And then I think we would keep up also the attention and the fight of awareness of the audiences. So it's never selfish. But on the other hand, of course, we all must be also realistic that other things happen too. And if there is a conflict in the Middle East as well, the citizens legally should also be equally informed about that. It must never be such that the journalists would say, we cannot cover the conflict in Sudan, which is for the time being the biggest and most bloody war in the world. It must never be that we turn our blind eye to the victims of the war in Sudan just because we have a war in Europe and a war in the Middle East. So in one way, they are competing, but that doesn't mean that they can be hierarchically ordered as one is more important than another one. I have an anecdote. Many, many years ago, a Danish traveler happened to cross Sahara in Africa. This is back in the 1960s. And there was a giant conflict in Biafra and hunger even following that. In many respects, it had some similarities to nowadays war in Sudan. But that was a terrible war, and it took the headlines of the Western news media because people were having famine. And this guy, he traveled just some northern more through Sahara, and he ended up in Chad, which is a republic in the Sahara, and he called, and he saw there was a civil war. And it was very, very bloody, and it was very, very fighting. And he hadn't heard about it, so he started calling. He was a photographer, so he took photos documenting the war and the violence. and he tried to sell it, as we say, to the newsrooms in Denmark. So he called the newspapers and the television and the radio, and he told me once that he got the answer, no, we can only cover one war in Africa. That's competition the bad way. Some of the editors even said, there ain't such a country called Chad. I'm here, he said. How can you say that? Because I checked in our files, in our archives, we have never covered anything like Chad, so there's no such country. We can turn our blind eye to one piece of news just because there's another piece of news which is more bloody. So this is the challenge for journalists, to keep our interest in finding new aspects of the Ukrainian war and never forget your situation, but also, of course, share our attention to the other tragic events and also to the more happy events in the world, because there is also a world functioning, even in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want ask another question, that not only the facts and real situation compete of attention of people and broadcasting and newsline, but also fake and disinformation. And you're talking that you spend a lot of time teaching students and other groups of media literacy. What do you think? How this approach about how to educate, how to make the theory practical change because of this huge scale escalation and because all this, technology that implement Russia, and all the world can observe how it could be effective when you use it systematically? And do you see any progress? Because for tens of years, we do some training, conduct some materials, and we are still very vulnerable for all these fakes and disinformation technology.
Sure. I'm aware and optimistic.
Okay, this is good.
I grew up in a time where fewer people in the world could read. Even fewer had access to newspapers, and many states had a monopoly on, say, radio and television. When I grew up, we had one radio station and one television station controlled by the state in my country, Denmark. So if I said to my neighbor, did you watch the television yesterday? I could be sure that if he said yes, which he would, we had seen exactly the same program. That was an easy life, because we agreed on what's truth, because truth was what the state broadcaster told us yesterday.
Like one voice.
Like one voice. It's an easy world, but it's also a narrow world. I think the youth generation's access to an unlimited universe of news is basically a privilege, an advantage. It's basically better than having only access to the same bubble in a nation. So that's the positive side, that we get more views. We get also more opposing views, which is good for shaping our own opinion. That's a good side, that we get more access to information, because that's from where we build our opinions and our active participation in the civil society and in political life. The challenge or the disadvantage, which cannot be fought or go away, calls for our attention and our critical sense. And that's where media literacy comes in. Because literacy is the ability to read letters. If people could not read, letters would lose their value. No use of letters if you have no people who can read. So when it comes to media, no use of information if no people can distinguish between the information and use it and access it and be critical to it, selecting what they take in and what they ignore. And that's what takes attention these years, because the more technologies come in, the more media platforms and the more pollution and the more noise and rubbish and poor journalism and fake news and disinformation, the more polluted waters comes into the media ocean, the more we need to take our glasses of criticism and to handle the tools to distinguish. What makes me optimistic for the future generation is my meeting with students here in Lviv today.
Okay.
They are all like 50 years younger than me, and they grew up in this uh, in this wild ocean of polluted and clean waters. But they were so good at distinguishing. They were critical to their mind, and they were much better than me to handle the technical tools that follows. Because every time fake news appears or AI appears and is abused for fake news, every time there will also be an instrument to detect it. If you Photoshop a picture, if you AI generate a false picture of the war front, there will also be you will also leave digital footprints or fingerprints that is to be detected. So AI is used to generate false pictures, but since it's AI generated, if you know about AI, you can also detect that this is AI. And these are the tools I'm sharing with the youngsters. And my optimistic mood today, after having met these Leif students, is that they were good at this. They really grabbed, they used their the advantage of the access to all sorts of sources, but they also knew how to detect what's wrong and what is not wrong. And they had a healthy, critical attitude to media. My generation didn't have that because we simply believed in the state and what they told on the television. So the more information, the better for the citizens. And as I've seen, the young people get even as much more competent in distinguishing instead of just believing.
Could you give any examples? What does it mean for you personally to use critical thinking in everyday life?
Yeah, the good thing I hope is that I get kind of cheated less when people try to convince me something in a poor manner. I hope I'm more literate and more critical. In the bad way, it has also given me, like some would call it nihilistic, which is a valueless attitude. So every time I hear a story, I would also know that some other would perceive that story in another way. Say, if you draw the number 6,
oh, it would be 9
behind us, between us, I would read a 9, and you would read a 6, and some would say it's a 6 and I'm wrong, and I would say it's a 9 and you're wrong. I tend, the more I know about media, to believe that we are both right. And that's true, but it's not enough. We also need, after having understood both perspectives, to find out that there are 2 dimensions and 2 perceptions, and reality is perception. So what I think about you doesn't tell about you. It only tells about what I think of you, and that's very that may make myself confused sometimes. I hear a piece of news, and I would know that there would be other pieces of news, and they're all valid, because they're not all valid. But I can tend to believe they're all equally valid, which they're not. So the art is accessing the news, being critical, but also daring create your own opinion based on the varied opinions you meet, if that makes sense.
And do you think that this is creating of new culture of zero trust? It's something good because it's like a good options. For example, I trust nobody and nothing, but in the other, it could be a problem for cooperating. For example, me with you, because I see 9, you see 6, and it's very complicated to negotiate about it.
I think trust is needed for democracy. You have to have like a basic level of trust to the authorities, to the politicians, to media, and to each other, in order for a society not to keep on fighting amongst its members. On the other hand, if you have too much trust, you will also take the oxygen out of the democracy, because you would not question. And without questions, there would be no innovation, and without innovation, there would be no development. And it's the same goes within a democracy. Without opposing views, if we all trusted what our prime minister said, and there would be no discussion, and with no discussion, no new ideas, and no change, and no democracy. So in my country, Denmark, along with Norway and Sweden, we have very high levels of trust, 80% or more. It's counted every year by a German institution called Edelman's Trust Barometer, and he does a barometer, and we are in the top. 80+% would believe what the government says, believe what the authorities said, believe what's in the media. In the other end of the spectrum, there are countries where less than 20% of the population believe in the government, the authorities, and the media. That's bad. But too much trust may be bad too. We have this joke in Denmark that we trust our prime minister so much. So when COVID came and she gave an order to the population or an advice, they would all just follow instead of question. And it's also healthy that the population questions their governments. That's part of democracy. So the joke went, if Mette, that's the name of our prime minister, if Mette says jump, we won't say why, we'll say how high. It's always nice that people ask their governments and the authorities and the media, are you sure about this and why? The question why is so important for democracy. So if you never why your authorities and your government, democracy gets a little more bubbled or narrowed or fenced in. So too little trust in the society, instability comes.
Mhm.
Too much trust, too little democracy. So somewhere in between.
So
half.
keep asking questions.
Yes.
And thank you for your time and that you share your excellent ideas and approach. And maybe you want to say something to Ukrainian people.
Oh, keep on fighting, keep on believing, and remember, there will be an end. I have experienced so many wars. They all ended. I can't say why, I can't say just or not, but if you're 22 and in the middle and grew up in a war, it's so hard to acknowledge that it will ever end. It will.
Thank you.